Good morning, everybody. My name is Susan Lejeune-Dalgarzec. I am the British High Commissioner to Canada, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this session this morning, focusing on the green recovery and how we can work together to ensure that as we rebuild our economies after the COVID pandemic, we make sure that we do it in a way that's as sustainable and inclusive as possible. I'm delighted that to discuss the two huge challenges facing almost every country around the world, we have a really eminent panel of experts who I'll ask to introduce themselves in a minute. But I'm also delighted that this is a UK-Canada collaboration, because over the past 8 months, 9 months or so, the UK and Canada have been working really closely together to share experience, to share research, to work together, to find out the best ways to confront, to control, and then to recover from the pandemic, which is so strongly in both our countries. The UK is taking a leadership role in the fight against COVID-19, but obviously this is yet another one of those issues which we cannot do alone. And as we look to rebuild after the pandemic, one of the key risks, as we see it, is that in the rush to rebuild our economies, we forget the other major, even larger challenge facing us all, which is climate change and the potentially catastrophic impact that will have on our planet for many, many generations to come. So we're looking at the green recovery this morning, and it's particularly important for us as the UK to be leading this effort and to be leading this discussion, because as many of you I'm sure will know, we will be holding the presidency of the next COP climate change conference, which will be taking place in the wonderful Scottish city of Glasgow in almost exactly a year's time. Unfortunately postponed. We should have been in the middle of it now, but that postponement gives us even longer to prepare properly and to make sure that that conference has an ambitious set of targets, and that we have as many countries as possible committed to the climate change goals, which are so important, particularly the commitment to net zero. I'm going to ask the members of the panel to introduce themselves. Unfortunately, one of the advertised panel members is not with us yet. I'm hoping he will join us later, and then ask them to introduce themselves and talk about their particular perspective on the issue of the green recovery. Then I will throw some questions to them, and at the end of this session, there will be a chance for you to put your questions, the audience, to put questions in the chat bar, and I will pose those to the panel. And I will start off with Professor Rémi Quirion. Professor Quirion, would you like to introduce yourself first, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just wanted to make sure of one thing. Since the clock has not started ticking yet, are we really live, or we're just in the middle of nowhere in the virtual space? So maybe if the technician can check that, because it's my 4th or 5th session at CSPC, and usually it's not exactly like that. And usually also we see the speaker in the middle of the screen.
Yes, I think it would be it would be good to know that we're not just talking into a void. So yes, if the tech guys could check that for us, thank you, Professor.
So thank you very much, High Commissioner. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. And of course, as was mentioned, the pandemic changing the world, at the same time giving great opportunity to think green and to have a green recovery, sense of urgency there. And if I'm thinking about Canada, when I think green, I think a lot about the North, about the Arctic, and already there's discussion of a collaboration between the UK and Canada, between UKRI, NRC, FRQ, and so on. But I think it's critical because there is nowhere else almost on the planet that the impact of climate change are so obvious. And there is population that are highly disadvantaged, so we must make sure that we do not forget them in our plan.
Fantastic, thank you, Professor. And having travelled to the Arctic a couple of years ago, thanks to the Canadian government, I have seen for myself the already huge impact of climate change on those communities. Absolutely crucial to our response. Thank you. Our next panelist is Dr. Valérie Bécært. Sorry, Bécært. Dr. Bécært, would you like to introduce yourself? We can't hear you. I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
I'm not muted.
Okay, now it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it good?
Yeah, you're good now. Yeah.
Okay, I was not muted. So I was saying, very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I have the chance to be the director of research of the research group at Element AI, which is a small Montreal company that is wanting to bring AI to the industry, helping them being more efficient and more smart. Taking care of the fundamental research in this group. However, my background is a little bit more connected to what is interesting for us today. Having a PhD in the soil ecotoxicology, and then working mostly in the field of circular economy. So you will understand that my interest is really, we have a great opportunity to think more holistically, more broadly, more globally, rebuilding, taking the better decisions, informed decisions, using the technology that is available to us, and bringing it to the right decision taker. It's a great opportunity now to bridge, in fact, maybe domains that are not connected. AI, climate change, a circular economy in this situation.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And already in the two introductions we've had, I've got loads of questions I would like to follow up with you, and I'm sure the other participants will have too. Thank you. And for our final, for the moment, panel participant is Dr. Alison Robinson, who joins us from the lovely UK. Dr. Robinson, over to you.
No, thank you very much, and absolutely delighted to be here. I guess I could only echo what my fellow panelists have said. I think what we've seen, particularly in the UK, and maybe the same in Canada, is that certainly our lockdown was a great scientific experiment. What does happen if we stop interacting the world in the way we have and start doing it in a new way? And we're really interested in that question. But I think, so I work for something called the Natural Environment Research Council. We're part of UK Research and Innovation. We do have some fantastic collaborations with Canada, and I'd agree with my panelists. Things in the changing Arctic Ocean, and also we're doing a great thing on soils, because it's a not much talked about area, but I think really important if you're thinking about sustainable futures, really, and how we move from understanding our science to environmental solutions. But I do sit in, I feel very lucky position to work for an organisation that's funded many very, very eminent and clever people who've over 50 years really contributed to these debates. I think what's really interesting, and as both panelists have already said, is how we listen to that science and think about how we work. So I'm very fortunate to be leading on how we want to showcase UK science at COP26, and of course all the wonderful international partnerships, including with Canada, that make that possible, as well as how we listen to our science in our only as we work as an organisation as well. And I think there is something about role modelling that behaviour too, not just thinking about the science we fund, but how we get to net zero. So we have committed to get to net zero as an organisation, which poses some wonderful innovation challenges. So I'm looking forward to using us as our own test bed as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm going to follow up on something that you, Dr. Robinson, have just said, and I'm going to ask all the panelists to respond to it. You mentioned how science has come to the fore during this pandemic. We've heard more scientists speaking on our television, on the radio, read more scientists in the newspaper, but at the same time, scientists are being challenged. Their findings are being dismissed, getting it right and getting people to take notice of the science has never been more important, but in some ways has never been more difficult. And perhaps as a government scientist, Professor Quirion, you'd like to start by responding how you deal with that.
No, it's a great question, and we have never seen science on as much on TV, newspaper, social media since last March. And I was joking here in Quebec, saying that science now is on the forefront. Scientists are in the news all the time. So we have replaced sport. And I have nothing against hockey, but I would hope that after the pandemic, scientists will still be on the forefront. I think, many my government, many ministers and high-level policymakers have never opened their door as much as now. Because even if they are not so concerned about science in some department, now they say, "Oh, yes, we have." So I think that's good. At the same time, as you said, there is challenge because, of course, scientists, yes, we agree, we don't, especially with the pandemic. You have a new virus, you don't know the virus that much. Science has been great, open science all over the world and all that, so never seen as many collaboration, but also sometimes we disagree. So I think to the general public, one of the things that we have to do better is to explain the scientific method. It's not necessarily the result of the day on the front page of the New York Times or any paper in the world. It's more the method. How do we get there? And I think we have to start to have more and more of this type of program that will be closer to our fellow citizens. So maybe citizen science, participatory science, so that they start to understand a little bit more, a little bit better the scientific method. And that's what we have discussed quite a lot here in Canada with various programs in the Quebec government, but also at the national level with Mona Niemer, the Chief Scientist of Canada, a lot of interaction to try to see how we can explain a bit better science to Canadians, but also globally, because false news, fake news has been all over the place, so we have to find ways. And it's not by saying, no, that's not right. We have to explain more the process of science.
Fantastic, thank you. Perhaps, Dr. Robinson, you could give us a perspective from the UK on the same question, and then I'll come to you, Dr. Bécært.
No, thank you. Really just to echo, I guess, where we just heard from Dr. Quirion. I think it's been really interesting looking through the lens of how we celebrate and showcase UK and international science for COP26, because we know from the UK there's a huge appetite and goodwill for lots of people to get involved in that. I think I agree about the usefulness and the interestingness, I guess, of things like citizen science and more participatory methods in that. Because Susan, you began by asking about a more inclusive recovery as well. And actually, it's not just that those processes and those approaches we've found aren't just about, exactly as Rémi said, about bringing people to understand the science and the complexities and the uncertainties and the judgments in that, but also bringing those other perspectives in for our scientists to be really challenged and think about how they share their science and express that science and think about new environmental solutions informed by those different viewpoints as well. And I think that kind of interaction is really important and is something we're trying to do, in the lead up to COP26, because there is in the UK, but around the world as well, there's huge appetite to know how to act and how to take the scientific advice and make that purposeful and make a change. And I think we have a role in kind of bringing those two things together.
Great, thank you very much. And Dr. Bécært, from your perspective as a scientist working in industry, in a very complex field, which for the layman is really quite difficult to understand, how do you approach it?
That's a very, very good question. And even like when I was more involved in the life cycle analysis and circular economy, people are coming to us, to the scientists, for answers. They want us to give them the answers, and then they have nothing to do after that. They don't have any decisions to take, or they don't necessarily need to think about it. You know, they're expecting the science to give them the truth, and maybe that's that their expectations are too high or uninformed. So we want the science, and the science is more accessible now, but at the same time, it needs to be accompanied. I don't know if it's the right term there, but and I was seeing this since the beginning of my career with industry. We want to rely on truth. Science is supposed to bring the truth, but it's never, you know, there's no magic. It's never that easy.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think one of the things that the government in the UK has been very clear to make the distinction between is that scientists provide the evidence and advise, but it's politicians who take decisions based on that evidence. And I think that is it's a very, very important point. As you say, Valérie, you don't provide the answers, you provide the evidence which allows people to take a decision. But I think there's it's a complex area, and I think it's seeing scientists standing up and talking is great, but I think we still need to be very clear that, you know, policy is made by politicians, and sometimes it may not be entirely in line with what the scientists are suggesting, but that's a political decision, and that's absolutely correct. To focus in a bit more on the idea of the green recovery, what for each of you is the biggest challenge facing us in terms of making sure that as we build back, we don't build back and fix or even make worse some of the tendencies that have been going on so far? Perhaps I'll start with you, Alison, this time. What do you see as the biggest challenge in green recovery?
Well, I have to say, I'm not a massive fan of this word recovery. I think that part of the challenge is us learning to live in these many new ways, whether it's from COVID or from needing to rethink about how we achieve net zero. I think there are a few challenges in there, but I guess I should say I've also had the advantage of going up to the Arctic with some wonderful scientists from the British Antarctic Survey, and it's both a cause for concern, because it really does bring home the impact of climate change, particularly, or also some other related issues like biodiversity loss and, of course, plastic pollution, which are nicely intertwined as a neat bundle. But what I'm also most impressed about, I think, is that there is still cause for hope. While I think we do have this huge challenge in thinking about how we shift our understanding to get to net zero on quite a sporty timetable, I have to say, to really make that happen. I think some of what we're trying to do as an organisation and showing our science is to map out those pathways and test those pathways to do that. And really not just focus on mitigation, but also the adaptation needed to do that. I think for me, the biggest challenge, but also where I do think humans are very good at doing this, is how to do that in a way. People talk about behaviour change needed. I think it's actually more about thinking about how we adapt to do that in a way that's sort of got human design in there, so that we all as humans pick up the solutions and act on them. But I think it's been quite an interesting 12 months that I think I will go back to saying I have some hope about the number of businesses and organisations that have committed to going to net zero with real action behind that as well. And that real drawing on the science and science-based targets to help them do that. And the fact that there is just this like upswell of goodwill. And if there's one good thing to take out of COVID, it is that you hear these reports of people feeling much more connected to nature and that more appreciation of nature. And I hope that can carry us through.
Fantastic, thank you. Valérie, could I ask from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest challenges? I mean, there are obviously opportunities for a business like yours, but there are also challenges. What do you see as the biggest impediment to, I won't call it a recovery anymore, I will call it, I don't know what I will call it, I'll ask Alison to give me another term I can use, but to build back better?
From my perspective, my main concern for like the global organization that is the human race is maybe the exhaustion of the people. If we want to rebuild better and stronger, we will need to take probably hard decisions, probably unpopular decisions. Are we maybe we're too fragile to think about that, or to be brave enough to go through those changes and those decisions? For me, that's the biggest challenge. Even before thinking about anything else, any action or any specific decisions, will we be too exhausted to take the right and brave decisions that we'll have to take?
I think it's a really important point, and I think at the beginning people found a lot of this quite novel and exciting, and actually not quite enjoyed it. That's not the right term, but I think there was a sense that it was novel and different and interesting, and I think it's now very clear that we're not going to be out of this for many months still, despite the fantastic news that's come out this week about vaccines. And I think you're right, that sense of fatigue and the need to keep people engaged and to have them motivated to look for solutions and not just sort of retreat into some sort of acceptance of it's all going to be really bad and there's nothing I can do about it, is a very, very important point. And the human factor in all of this is something that we cannot afford to ignore. Rémi, what's your perspective on the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I add a little bit to what the colleague already said. For me, of course, pandemic, a lot of very, very negative side to it. But also positive side, if we can say it like that, the sense of urgency. So of course you see people affected, you see people dying in your neighborhood. So you have a sense of urgency there. Open science, never seen as many collaboration very, very quickly, people working together, data being freely available all over the place and all that. So that's very, very positive. A bit like Alison was saying, and in a sense, what Valérie was saying, but resilience. And of course, was a bit easier in the spring than now, but still, I'm quite amazed, resilience. And this applied to big city, like London and Toronto or Montreal, but also isolated community in the north, for example, in Canada. Bringing on board in the future social science and humanities will be absolutely critical. Of course, in first phase, we focus a lot on the virus, how it acts, developing vaccine, but more and more we'll have to think about social impact of the pandemic. And I think thinking globally is also a lesson from the pandemic. We have to, and if we can bring that, the challenge for me, one of the main challenge is that some of these lessons learned from the pandemic, sense of urgency, openness, global, can we somehow translate that into climate change? Because there it's not as obvious for our citizen what's the impact on me, on my family, on my street, on the short term. So we have to find a way to translate that into climate change, and maybe we need to work with the youth on that, with the younger population that are very sensitive to all the impact of climate change. So I'll say translating what we learned from the pandemic into green recovery or whatever the term, and climate change, a sense of urgency there is certainly a challenge for us.
Fantastic, thank you. And I totally agree. I think one of the really interesting things about the climate change movement, or the fight against climate change, is how far youth movements have had such a significant impact. I mean, there's obviously the very high profile campaign led by Greta Thunberg, but I think more broadly, the key to making sure that this gets baked in and that governments take notice and take the right action is to ensure that that youth movement and the enthusiasm and the passion that young people bring to this, because it's their planet. It's, I'm old enough that it's less of an impact on me, but for my children and their children, this is the big thing that they all really care about. So I think it's an absolutely crucial part of our response. One of the other things that you've all mentioned is collaboration. So whether we're talking about collaboration between researchers in different countries, whether we're talking about collaboration between the private sector, academia, and governments, it's obvious that this is that climate change and the need to rebuild our economies cannot happen with just one of those players taking action. It needs to be a joint effort. And I wonder, perhaps, if Valérie, this time I could start with you. How can we make sure that all those three parts, and civil society too, so actually it's four parts, how all those four players work together to deliver the solutions and the innovation and the advances that we need to properly tackle this?
That's a wonderful topic. Collaboration, it's a word that is used a lot, but it's not that easy. To make it happen. It's a mindset. It starts with building trust between the different actors that we want to bring around the same problem and to find a solution together to be able to hear each other, not only hear, not only listen, but to understand. It takes energy. It takes a lot of will also. But it's absolutely crucial if we want to be able to think globally, if we want to be able to find a true solution, if we want really to move together. How will this happen? I think it's with people that are completely maybe dedicated to bringing people together, to bringing organizations together, to bridging organizations together. And I can say, for example, I know the example of Dr. Quirion. What he did since the beginning of his mandate as scientifique en chef du Québec was to bring people together, to bring even the three different organizations together. He knows that it takes a lot of energy. It's to continue on that path and to even force it a bit.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, that's a very neat segue into you, Dr. Quirion. How do you see it from your perspective? How have you managed to do that?
Well, still a challenge. I know that in the UK now with UKRI also, that's people are trying to bring all these experts together. Often I say in French, seul on va plus vite, mais ensemble on va beaucoup plus loin. So I think we have to think that way. Valérie talk about trust. I talk very often about learning the language of the others, and there it's not from French to English. It could be from French to Mandarin. So at first you say, my God, the others are so stupid, they don't understand anything. But as you start to learn, then you say, this is something I could do that we could do together. So I think in terms of climate change, various organizations are trying to do that, climate change and also maybe the recovery, the green recovery. So working together, all together, different disciplines. And when you start to understand each other, then you can go so much faster. And I think the new generation, again, bring back the young, that's what they want. They don't necessarily care, is it the Department of Biochemistry or is it social science or whatever? And the expert, is the expert based in London or in Hong Kong? The world is theirs, and they want to say, my project is the following. I like to work with the best expert. They'd be in Canada, they'd be in the UK, find ways to collaborate much more to focus on the big challenge of our planet. So I think taking the time to understand the others is very critical, and then working with the younger generation that maybe they want a university of tomorrow a bit different from the one that we have now.
And some of that might actually be forced upon us, because with universities increasingly being virtual and not face-to-face, then these things may be, I mean, there are downsides to that as well as upsides, but it may be easier to achieve some of that in current circumstances. Alison, from the UK perspective, you know, you're working with the UK government to deliver on some of this stuff. What do you think works, and where do you think we can get better?
Well, I think I come back to sort of the power of people and ideas in this. I agree entirely with Rémi. Organisations can put up unintended barriers all the ways. We're very good at putting in our structures and then having to kind of crash through them to find things. But it is true that whether it's working with government on something like COP26 or working with business on kind of areas like green finance, which are so fundamental, I agree with Rémi entirely. It doesn't have to be an actual different language. It can be such a different perspective on a system, and trying to marry up Earth observation scientists with people who look at risk on capital ledgers is a lesson in language in itself, but one we have to get better at. But I do come back to kind of the sense of goodwill and urgency that we find ourselves in, and that comes from people being committed and having ideas that they can build shared coalitions around. So I think there is, again, real positives from this. I remember last year I was heavily involved in a cross-UKRI, cross-business, cross-scientist collaboration to tackle plastics in the environment. And how wonderful to be working with the innovators on the waste management side, which is an absolutely fascinating area and new to me, along with the engineers who can look at the materials themselves, and the ecologists and the marine scientists who can tell you about the unintended consequences, and the richness of working with them, also with business who have a consumer pressure to change, comes up with some amazing results in a very, very short period of time. So I think for people in my position working in organisations that are big behemoths by themselves, our challenge is to make that touch point as simple as possible so those people and ideas can flourish. And then we can listen to them, and actually how we run our organisation as well. We can apply that, so we're not just funding some science, we're doing it as well.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that the point you made about consumer pressure being part of this is really important, because I think the grassroots pressure on climate change has forced governments, if they want to be re-elected, or if they want to be elected, to take notice of that. And in the UK, we have seen it across the board, from art galleries which are refusing to accept corporate sponsorship from organisations which are not committing to net zero, to supermarkets, to, I mean, everybody. And big investors, crucially, you talked about green finance, the huge institutional investors, including in Canada, are now taking this very, very seriously. And that will be one of the most important levers, I think, for radical change and really important and lasting change in this area. I wanted to ask you about, specifically about the Arctic, because you've all mentioned the Arctic. And having been there and having seen its beauty, but also seen the vulnerability of the communities that live there in the Canadian Arctic, what is the one thing you think that we could do in the context of COP26? You know, we have a massive opportunity here. What's the one thing that we could do at COP that would make a difference to those communities? If you could wave your magic wand and have one thing for those communities. I'll start with you, Rémi, if I may.
At least for Canada, to make sure that they are connected, because now in the digital world, in the northern part of Quebec, many of these communities are not connected yet. And we want to, of course, we talk about university or college being virtual. We want to increase literacy. But if there is no access to basically to internet or high-speed internet, it's a big issue. So we have to make sure that we do not leave them behind. For me, if you have a magic bullet tomorrow, will be to connect the whole of the country.
Thank you. I saw that too, and that was one of the main messages that I heard from them, because nobody today really can exist without that connectivity, and particularly on the educational side, very, very important. And that is actually something which extends obviously beyond communities in the north. Any remote community is facing very, very similar issues. Valérie, what would be the one thing that you could do if you could wave your magic wand for the north?
I don't have the chance to have seen the wonderful North as our other panelists. That's a good question. I think that connectivity also is the main issue. Maybe a magic, if you were talking about a magic wand, is for us to understand inclusivity. This is a concept that is very difficult to even understand. We can imagine, we can use the word, but understand it and making it happen is another thing. And maybe we would need a bit of magic there.
Thank you. That leads very neatly into one of the questions that I've already got to ask you when we get back to get onto the questions point. Alison, what would be the one thing you would like to be able to do?
Yeah, I agree with both my fellow panelists really, but so just to add to that, I was really struck when I went to the Arctic by sort of the immediacy of the change. And I think there is something about, in the lens of COP26, for those of us who live in less remote areas, understanding what folks there are actually experiencing on a kind of annual cycle, really, I think is really important. And just pick up the idea of connectivity in a different way as well. I think there is something for those communities about sharing those local interventions and collaborations that can happen. So actually, the last time I went to the Arctic, I ended up having a long chat with some Indian scientists who are so interested in learning from the Arctic about the challenges of the permafrost, to take that back to the Indian Himalaya, and making sure that there's those connectivities of those different approaches and those local approaches, I think is something that, in the lens of something so big and so policy driven like COP, understanding those individual experiences and helping share them is really important, that this is real stuff affecting real people, as well as needing systems and structures and policies to make a difference.
Fantastic. So I think you're absolutely right. I think making sure those voices are heard and that lived experience is highlighted on the international stage, really crucial, and COP will be a fantastic platform for that. One of the things I think that I was very struck by was how heavily reliant those communities are on heavily polluting, emitting energy generation sources. So trying to find an alternative which addresses that issue, and it might be small modular reactors. I mean, who knows what it might be, but that is with the broadband access, I think that is absolutely crucial part of the of how we can tackle some of the real challenges facing those communities. We have about 19 minutes left. And while I've absolutely loved asking you the questions, I think it's only fair to ask the audience for this event now to ask some questions. And I've got quite a few coming in here. So if you are listening and you would like, or watching, if you would like to ask some questions, please post them and they will come up to me. I'm going to have to put my glasses on now because I can't read them without. So the first question is about renewable energy. And how far renewable energy can be a part of the solution or the answer to climate change issues. And as we've seen, solar and wind energies in particular are now becoming far more cost competitive than they were. They used to be a bit of a luxury. Now, and in the UK, we generate a huge amount of our energy through wind power very successfully. So the question is, what government policies and regulations are required to address the market and technological issues preventing an optimal electricity grid integration of renewable energies? That's partly about battery storage and how we can make sure that these less reliable, I mean important, but less reliable in terms of coming on stream energies can be used. And that question comes from Denis Gilbert. So perhaps could I ask you, Rémi, to start, and then I'll come on to Alison.
Great question, of course. There is a movement, almost independent of the pandemic. There'd be a lot of movement that was started a few years back, and there's more and more pressure from the public. We mentioned the public before, to go into that direction. Wind power, solar energy, of course, in Quebec, hydroelectricity, a lot of that, hydrogen. So the government of Quebec just yesterday released some kind of a strategy plan to have more and more of that. So I think incentive to be creative, to be innovative there, incentive to not necessarily to the large one, the large company, the large industry, but smaller SMEs and even from academia to think, for example, battery, much more effective type of battery will be certainly at some point important. Hydrogen, still a bit early, but there is also opportunity there, I think, to have maybe a portfolio of renewable energy, not focusing only on one. And depending on the region of the world that you are into, you may have a bit of a different strategy. So I think incentive from government, very, very important. And I will ask the public to continue to put pressure on us, to put pressure on government, so that they move more quickly.
Great, thank you. Alison.
Yeah. So I agree with all of that. And I guess just to add some other parts to factor into this, I think there's also something about understanding the demand side of energy as well as the supply side. And I agree with Rémi entirely about incentives and pressure and the need to support continued innovation, because things have changed, exactly as Susan said, in the UK significantly over the last 5 years. And a lot of disruption from SMEs and innovators in that system has been incredibly effective. But I think, particularly working in a scientific organisation, many of the things that we want to invest in and grow, climate modelling being one of them, are very energy hungry beasts. So I think there are some really very big structural questions about how we cool down computers, because actually a lot of the energy we use is to heat them up so they work, but can they not get as hot in the first place so we don't have to spend the energy on cooling them down? And I think there's a great deal to do on new ones about underground geothermal energy and some new underground technologies that help us get to net zero as well. And I think there's a new range as well as a role for government in really thinking about how we promote and support everyday energy supply too. But I do think that there is something to think about on the demand side as well, that as we want to become more scientific, as we want to use these things, how we not only evolve the science, but how the science operates through a net zero lens. And I think there's a challenge on us all to kind of adopt our own science in how we develop these things too.
Fantastic, thank you. Valérie, is there anything you'd like to add on how AI can feed into this?
Maybe I will be a little more drastic in my answer. You mentioned that wind power, solar energy is beginning to be more competitive, but I think that we should probably revise how we see that the price of our energy use. We are not considering externalities. I think that until we are able to do that, we will never be able to consider that alternatives are competitive. And it's not a fair game. we're not using the right numbers, the right metrics to take those decisions. And my hope is really that using more data, producing more data, being able to analyze them, we would be able to take the right decisions, use the right metrics. And that includes being able to optimize our green mix, optimize our capacity to use renewable energy and exchange globally. But until we are able to use the right metrics to have the right data, this will be very, very difficult.
Fantastic, thank you. And you're absolutely right. One of the big institutional investors I was talking to recently was talking about the need when taking decisions on investing in massive infrastructure projects, for example, not to look always for the cheapest, because the cheapest might be the cheapest in money terms. The environmental and climate impacts may well make that actually in the longer term a very, very expensive project. So the way in which we evaluate those things has to change if we're really going to make the sustainable difference that we want. Thank you very much. Great insights from all of you. The next question is a broader one, but I think it's a really important one to think about. So the question: people think of climate change as a faraway thing. However, there's also racial justice in North-South issues, as many developing countries are already feeling the effects harder than in developed nations, who cause most of the issues. How can we bring a racial justice eye to the climate change issues? And this is about, obviously, the impact on African and other countries, less developed countries, but also particularly small island states, where the impact of climate change is massive. And we've already talked in the Canadian context about the Arctic, where the impact is huge. So perhaps Alison, I'll start with you on this one. So how can we address those sort of inequity issues in the way that we look at climate change?
Yeah, no, the two absolutely go hand in hand, I think. And I think there's some threads, I think, from our earlier conversations about working in partnership and how we do those sort of from global to local collaborations as well. You know, I've got running through my head some case studies, I guess you call them, of things we've funded our scientists to do that really do make a difference, from working on biodiversity in the Amazon rainforest with local communities there and with local governments having to make complex choices about economic productivity for an area against sort of environmental impact and the long-term degradation that also impacts those communities. And I think what we try and need to do more of, I think, in how we consider how we work in those remote and fragile environments is those collaborations and making sure it's not science by itself or a community grappling with issues by itself, but bring those two things together. I don't think there is a perfect solution to this. We've just had a discussion with Valérie about the externalities and how you put this in the cost of things as well, and that there are some barriers about access in those ways that do need considering. And the more we can think about how environmental risks, issues of long-term environmental resilience are placed in kind of value terms, it helps. But Susan, I'm not going to pretend I've got here with an easy answer. They absolutely have to go hand in hand, and I think it's about bringing in those different ranges of voices so that we understand those impacts in different ways. But I think it's a real challenge sometimes for big institutions to do that as well as they might, and it's something we all need to keep working at.
Fantastic, and I know that one of the strands for the COP conference is climate finance and ensuring that the more developed nations put their hands in their pockets and do more in terms of financing projects and so on in developing countries to help them address these issues, and it's something where we hope that the Canadian government will join and make a big contribution to the COP goals. Rémi, what is your take on the effectively north-south divide part of climate change?
Yeah, it's certainly a great question and a great challenge. And many of us, of course, are very much concerned about the global south and making sure that they are at the table, that we work with them. We don't offer solution to them. We co-create with them. I think it's very, very critical. Here in Canada, in Montreal, we have the head office of Future Earth, the future of the planet. And of course, climate change is a key component of that. And one of the strategies we are planning to use now is related to artificial intelligence, how to apply that to a model like was discussed before. But of course, this is something that's quite well developed in the country of the north, so much less in the global south. So we have to find a way to readjust. And maybe an example, although it's far from perfect, again, from the pandemic, is a vaccine. So of course now the rich country are buying from the big pharma doses and to make sure they will have enough to offer to their citizen, but that's not enough. So I think we have to work globally there and making sure that the rich country like England, like Canada, are very much involved there and offer free of charge, in a sense, these vaccines in the future. That's a global responsibility in a global pandemic, and I think the very same should and must apply to climate change and eventually a green recovery.
Fantastic, thank you, Valérie.
I think that Alison mentioned it like at the very beginning of our panel. We are in a social experiment, so I think we should learn about what we were able to learn on the disruption that the COVID did to our structure. You know, the more we saw clearly the impact of the gaps between the poor, the rich, between the north, the south. I think it's a great opportunity to learn and to try to figure out what we should not do and what we should do, because climate change is like COVID is a disruption. Maybe we do not see it as short term as and as a small amount of time as COVID, but it is a disruption. And we would be very dumb not to learn from what we experience, at least in the scientific society, and try to bring those learnings to the political world or the business.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just going to, at this point, I'm going to feed in some thoughts from the panelist who, for technical reasons, was not able to join us. So Damon Matthews, really insightful thoughts here. First, public buy-in to government action has been very high, which has allowed governments to take dramatic action. And it's true, if you had told any of us a year ago that we would have been happy to be told to stay at home, not go out, not see our friends, not go to the cinema, all those things we love doing, we would have said, you're absolutely mad, there is no way. And we've all done it. And the vast majority of the populations have followed that guidance. We don't yet have that level of buy-in on climate change. You know, that there are some small modifications that people have been happy to do, not use plastic, throw away shopping bags when they go to the supermarket. But some of the other really big things that need to be done have not got the same level of buy-in. So that is a key challenge, I think, and I think it's a really important point. Second point, the digital world has been fundamental in the COVID response. And the fact that if you have not been connected, you're at a significant disadvantage. And it brings us back to the points we made at the beginning about remote communities, whether they be in Africa or in the Arctic, and how that puts those communities at a double disadvantage in a situation like this. So, how can we address that inequity and the access issues? You're right, Professor Quirion. We have done a lot in terms of access to vaccines, and the international community has come together and said, yes, we cannot allow these just to be available to rich Western countries. We need to make sure that when they are developed, they are available to everybody, and we've put our money where our mouth is. We finance that access, but we need to do something very similar on climate. And the third, you can't lock down to stop climate change. This is a long-term thing. You can't have a 2-week circuit breaker and say, right, we've solved the problem. We need to have a much longer-term vision. And of course, in any democratic country where governments are not just looking at doing the right thing, they're looking at getting re-elected. That's always a challenge. And so in countries where you have a bipartisan approach to climate change, it has been much easier to take action. And I think the UK, in that respect, has done rather well. Our two main political parties are as one on climate change and the need to take action. And I think we need to try and move to a point where that is the default in every country across the world. My clock is ticking down, and I see I've got a couple of minutes left. I think we've got probably 2 or 3 minutes of flexibility there. I wanted to ask each of you whether you had a final thought that you would like to leave with our participants today, and then I'll briefly wrap up the session. Thank you. And I'll start with you, Dr. Quirion.
It's possible, and we must do it. So we have done a lot during the pandemic. We can do that also for climate change and having a greener economy.
Fantastic, thank you. Alison.
No, he stole my thunder. I just say exactly the same. I think the kind of, if you look back in the past about the remarkable things humans have done to solve deeply complicated problems, I'll point to the ozone hole because it's something that the UK scientists led, but was a incredibly positive international collaboration across business, civil society, government, and everyone else. We can tackle this, but we do need to start acting on it.
Fantastic, thank you. And Valérie for the final word.
Ooh, wow. Maybe saying that climate change is clearly a global effort, and we just had the proof that we can act globally and together. So, as we say in French, CQFD.
Exactly. Well, thank you, and thank you all for ending on that really optimistic note. I mean, these things can appear quite overwhelming, and I don't think that needs to be the case. And as you've all pointed out, when something completely unexpected was thrown at us, our governments, our scientists, our policymakers, our businesses rose to the challenge and responded in a way which has allowed us to minimize as far as possible the effect of the pandemic. And we need to harness that innovation, that collaboration, that cross-institutional working, that international cooperation in the same way to address climate change. And I'm sure that with that spirit, COP26 will be a fantastic success. We have all the foundations there. We have a year to go before we get there. And I'm as confident as you are that we can do what we need to do, but we can only do it together. So I would like to thank all of you for your really, really insightful contributions this morning. It's been fantastic to hear you all. I have learned a huge amount, and we look forward to further such events as we go on the road to net zero, on the road to Glasgow. Thank you all very much. Apologies to the people who sent in questions that I didn't have time for this morning. And apologies to Dr. Matthews that for whatever reason he wasn't able to join us, but his thoughts were fantastic. Thank you all very much. Thank you to UKRI for setting this up. and I look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you over the coming months. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your participation. Bye.